On March 22nd, 2025, in a conference hall in Italy, a team of researchers stood in front of 1,000 people and put an image on the screen that should not exist. It was a radar scan of the ground beneath the second pyramid of Giza. And in that scan, descending more than 2,000 feet below the pyramid of Khafre, were 8 enormous vertical shafts. Not cracks, not caves, shafts. Perfectly cylindrical, wrapped in what looked like spiral pathways, plunging 648 meters straight down through solid bedrock. And at the bottom, the shafts converged into 2 colossal cube-shaped structures, each one roughly 80 meters across, the size of a city block, buried nearly half a mile beneath the most famous monuments on Earth. The researchers did not call it a tomb. They did not call it a temple. Standing in front of the cameras, they said the pyramids are merely the tip of the iceberg of a colossal underground infrastructural complex. Infrastructure: shafts, chambers, pipelines, and what they described as a water system. In other words, machinery. A machine so large that the pyramid sitting on top of it would be nothing more than the visible housing. Within days, the story detonated across the world. And within days, something else happened. Egypt's most famous archaeologist declared the findings completely wrong. The Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities stated that no work around the Khafre pyramid had ever been authorized. Radar experts said the technology could not possibly see that deep. The team was accused of exaggeration, of deception, of trying to undermine ancient Egyptian civilization itself. The images were dismissed. The excavation requests went nowhere, and the ground beneath Giza stayed exactly as it has stayed for 4,500 years. Sealed. But here's what almost nobody in that news cycle mentioned. This was not the first time someone found evidence of something massive and unexplained beneath the pyramids. It wasn't even the second time. For nearly 2 centuries, explorers, engineers, and physicists have been pulling clues out of the Giza Plateau that point in the same uncomfortable direction. Precision that shouldn't exist. Voids that shouldn't exist. Underground chambers described by ancient writers, dismissed as legend, and then found. Each discovery was studied briefly, argued over, and quietly shelved. Tonight, we're going to lay those clues out in order. 3 of them. A haul of 100-ton boxes buried under the desert, cut so precisely that modern engineers struggle to explain them. A drill core in a London museum that suggests the Egyptians were cutting granite with something we can't identify. And a hidden void inside the Great Pyramid itself, as long as a passenger jet, confirmed by particle physics, and still unentered to this day. Then we'll come back to those 8 shafts and the day in March 2025, when someone finally claimed to see what they connect to. Because when you line the evidence up, a pattern emerges. And the pattern looks less like a graveyard and more like a facility. Start with the words the ancient world left us, because for centuries we've been reading them wrong. When the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt around 450 BCE, the priests told him something strange about the Great Pyramid. They said Khufu had built underground chambers beneath it, on a kind of island surrounded by water channels drawn from the Nile. Scholars dismissed it for 2,000 years. A tall tale told to a gullible tourist. Subterranean halls with flowing water under a pyramid in the middle of a desert plateau? Impossible. The Egyptians themselves wrote about a hidden world beneath Giza. They called the whole underworld the Duat, and they marked its entrance with a hieroglyph, a 5-pointed star inside a circle. Religious texts describe the tomb of Osiris resting in darkness beneath the plateau, surrounded by water, and describe passages, gates, and chambers laid out beneath the sands. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic, cosmology, mythology, a map of the afterlife, not a map of anything real. Then, in the 1990s, archaeologists pumped the water out of a flooded vertical shaft between the Sphinx and the Second Pyramid, a place now known as the Osiris Shaft. It drops roughly 30 meters underground. in 3 levels. The middle level held chambers with massive basalt sarcophagi, black boxes weighing tens of tons, lowered somehow down a vertical shaft barely wide enough to admit them. And at the very bottom, they found exactly what the texts described: a chamber with a great stone sarcophagus resting on a carved island, surrounded by channels of groundwater, with the traces of 4 pillars around it, matching the hieroglyph for the house of Osiris almost line for line. An underground room on an island, surrounded by water, beneath the Giza plateau. The myth wasn't a myth, it was a description, which raises a question that should make you uncomfortable. If the ancient sources were being literal about that, what else were they being literal about? That brings us to the first clue, the most visual one, because you don't need instruments or translations to see this one. You just need a flashlight and a tunnel in the desert about 20 kilometers south of Giza. In 1850, a French archaeologist named Auguste Mariette was working at Saqqara when he noticed the head of a sphinx poking out of the sand. He followed the buried avenue it belonged to, and it led him to a doorway cut into the rock. Behind that doorway was a network of underground tunnels, now called the Serapeum. And inside those tunnels, parked in carved side chambers, he found the boxes, 24 of them, each one carved from a single block of granite or diorite, some of the hardest stone on the planet. Each box weighs around 70 tons. Some estimates run closer to 100 tons with the lid. To put that in perspective, that is heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 737, carved from one piece of stone, polished to a near-mirror finish, and somehow maneuvered through narrow underground tunnels and lowered into pits with only inches of clearance. And it's not the size that breaks people's brains. It's the precision. The interior surfaces of these boxes are cut flat to tolerances that engineers have measured in fractions of a millimeter. The corners are square to a degree of accuracy we associate with machine shops, not bronze chisels. Engineers who have crawled inside these boxes with precision instruments have come out shaken, saying openly that they would struggle to replicate this level of flatness today without computer-controlled equipment. The mainstream explanation is that these were sarcophagi for the sacred Apis bulls, buried with honors over centuries, and there's real evidence for the bull cult at Saqqara. But that explanation has a problem. Several problems, actually. When Mariette opened the boxes, most of them were empty. No bulls. One box was found abandoned partway down a tunnel, as if the operation stopped mid-move, and to this day, it sits where the workers left it. A 70-ton object frozen in the act of delivery. Then there's the writing. A few of the boxes carry inscriptions, and they are shockingly crude. Shallow, uneven, scratched hieroglyphs on surfaces that are otherwise geometrically perfect, like graffiti carved onto an optical lens. The precision and the writing do not look like the work of the same hands, or even the same era. Some researchers have quietly suggested the obvious, that the boxes are older than the cult that labeled them, that the bull priests didn't build the Serapeum. They found it, and they moved in. And the deeper question is not who the boxes were for, it's how. Why would a burial container for a bull require optical-grade flatness on its interior walls, in total darkness, underground, where no human would ever see it? How do you turn a 70-ton monolith in a tunnel with no room to turn it and lower it into a pit with inches to spare by torchlight? You don't accidentally achieve aerospace tolerances. Precision like that is expensive. It takes enormous time and effort. Nobody spends that effort without a functional reason. Decoration doesn't need to be perfect. Machinery does. They weren't guessing. They were manufacturing. And whatever process they used, it was good enough that 4,500 years later, we still argue about whether we could match it. That's the first clue. Objects with machine-level precision, sealed underground. The second clue is smaller. Small enough to hold in your hand. And in some ways, it's more disturbing because it's not the product of the machine. It might be the tool mark. In the 1880s, the British engineer and archaeologist Flinders Petrie, the man who essentially invented scientific archaeology, conducted the most precise survey of the Giza Plateau ever attempted. Petrie was no mystic. He was a measurement fanatic, the son of an engineer, and he went to Egypt to debunk wild theories about the pyramids. But while he was there, he kept finding things he couldn't explain. Granite blocks with long, clean saw cuts, drill holes bored straight into the hardest stone in Egypt, and drill cores, the cylindrical plugs of stone left behind when you cut a circular hole. One of them, a piece of red granite now known as Core 7, sits in the Petrie Museum in London. And running around its surface is a spiral groove, a continuous, even helical line, like the thread of a screw, cut into granite. Petrie measured it and concluded the drill had been sinking into the stone at a rate that stunned him, cutting through granite far faster than the abrasion methods of the day should allow. He wrote, in his own published reports, that the amount of pressure required and the character of the cutting pointed to tools tipped with something harder than any material the ancient Egyptians were supposed to possess. He suggested jeweled points, fixed cutting stones like industrial diamond bits on tube drills. And Core 7 is not alone. On the east side of the Great Pyramid, Petrie documented a basalt pavement bearing long, straight saw cuts, some of them overrun marks where the saw slipped and gouged the stone. The kind of error you only make when a blade is moving with real speed and force. Inside the king's chamber itself, the granite Khafre, the great lidless box at the heart of the pyramid, carries a drill hole in one corner and tube drilling marks on its interior, cut into rose granite from Aswan, 800 kilometers up the Nile. Petrie cataloged all of it. Saws he estimated at nearly 3 meters long. Drills that had eaten through the hardest stone available to that civilization, as if it were an industrial material rather than a sacred one. The mainstream interpretation, developed over the following century, is that the Egyptians used copper tubes with loose sand or quartz abrasive, spun back and forth by hand or bow. And experiments have shown you can, eventually, grind a hole in granite that way. But that explanation has a problem. Experimental replications produce irregular scratch patterns, not the clean, regular spiral Petrie documented. And the cutting rates achieved in experiments are painfully slow compared to what the ancient tool marks imply. The tool marks in the granite of Giza look confident, fast, repetitive, the signature of an established industrial process, applied thousands of times across the plateau, and then completely lost. No drill has ever been found, no workshop, no wear stage examples of the tools evolving. The technology appears at full maturity in the Old Kingdom, is used to cut millions of tons of stone, and then vanishes from the archaeological record. So now hold those two clues together: machine-grade precision products, underground at Saqqara, machine-grade tool marks in the granite at Giza. Products and tools imply a third thing. They imply infrastructure, workshops, power, and operation. And operations leave large footprints, which brings us to the third clue, the biggest one. Because in 2017, physicists found the footprint, not under the pyramid, inside it. A project called Scan Pyramids had been running since 2015, led by teams from Egypt, France, and Japan. Their idea was elegant. Instead of drilling into the Great Pyramid, they would let the universe scan it for them. Muons, subatomic particles created when cosmic rays strike the upper atmosphere, rain down on the Earth constantly and pass through solid rock, losing energy as they go. Put muon detectors around and inside a pyramid, and over months you can build an X-ray of its internal structure. Empty space lets more muons through than solid masonry. It is physics. It cannot be faked, and it does not care about anyone's theory. In November 2017, the results were published in the journal Nature, one of the most rigorous scientific publications on Earth. 3 independent muon detection technologies, run by 3 independent teams, all found the same thing: a massive void inside the Great Pyramid, directly above the Grand Gallery. At least 30 meters long, the size of a passenger aircraft cabin, a space that appears in no plan, no ancient text, no previous survey. It had been hiding inside the most studied building in human history for 4,500 years. They called it the Big Void. And here is the detail that matters. It is not a known architectural feature. It is not one of the small relieving chambers above the king's chamber. It is an enormous, deliberate, enclosed space. And to this day, no human being has ever seen inside it. In 2023, the same project confirmed a second hidden space, a corridor 9 meters long behind the chevron blocks on the pyramid's north face. And this one, they actually got a camera into, threading an endoscope through a gap in the stones. The corridor was real, exactly where the muons said it would be. The physics works. The method is proven, which means the Big Void is real too. A sealed chamber the length of a jetliner, purpose unknown, contents unknown, sitting above the Grand Gallery right now, tonight, as you watch this. And the pyramid has done this to us before. In 1993, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot up one of the narrow shafts leading from the Queen's chamber, a passage barely 20 centimeters square, too small for any human, climbing at a steep angle through the body of the pyramid. 60 meters in, the robot's camera hit something nobody expected: a door. A small, finely worked limestone slab blocking the shaft, fitted with 2 corroded copper pins. A sealed door inside a shaft that officially led nowhere, in a building with no business having one. It took 9 years before anyone was allowed to look behind it. In 2002, on live television, a robot drilled a hole through the slab and pushed a camera into the gap. Behind the first door was a small, empty space. And then, a second door. In 2011, another robot, the Jetty project, snaked a flexible camera through the hole and found red ochre symbols painted on the floor of the hidden chamber, marks no human eye had seen since the pyramid was sealed. Then the Egyptian revolution happened, the project's permissions lapsed, and the exploration stopped. It has never resumed. The second door has never been opened. 14 years and counting. That is the pattern at Giza. A discovery, a glimpse, and then silence. If you're the kind of person who needs to know what's behind that second door, hit subscribe, because this channel investigates sealed sites and suppressed discoveries every single week. And this story is far from over. Because now the timeline gets interesting. The muon scans proved that the Great Pyramid contains major hidden spaces that official archaeology never predicted. And that result cracked a door open. If the pyramid's interior held secrets that big, what about the bedrock underneath it? 2 researchers decided to find out. And what they claim happened next is the reason this video exists. Corrado Malanga, a chemistry professor from the University of Pisa, and Filippo Biondi, a radar specialist then affiliated with the University of Strathclyde in Scotland, had spent years developing an unusual technique. They took synthetic aperture radar data from satellites, the same technology used to map terrain from orbit, and combined it with the tiny natural seismic vibrations that constantly ripple through the ground. Their idea was to convert those reflected signals into something like sound, acoustic tomography, and use it to image structures far deeper than ground-penetrating radar could ever reach. In 2022, they published a peer-reviewed paper using this method on the interior of the Khafre pyramid, reporting previously unknown internal features. That paper passed review. It's in the literature. Then they aimed the method downward. They were not the first to try. Back in 1977, a team from SRI International in California ran resistivity and acoustic surveys around the Sphinx and detected several anomalies in the bedrock, including what their report described as possible cavities near the monument's paws and flank. Limited drilling followed, the results were inconclusive, and the matter was filed away. Half a century later, Malanga and Biondi returned to the same ground with tools the SRI team could only have dreamed of. And on March 22nd, 2025, at that press conference in Italy, with 1,000 delegates in the room and a live stream running, they presented the Khafre project findings. 8 vertical, hollow, cylindrical shafts arranged in 2 parallel rows beneath the pyramid of Khafre, each one wrapped by a descending spiral pathway. Depth 648 meters, over 2,100 feet. The shafts merge into 2 cubic structures, approximately 80 meters on each side. Around the pyramid's base, 5 identical smaller structures, connected by pathways, and fainter signals suggesting the complex continues even deeper, with some reports describing possible features more than 1,200 meters down, and a network stretching over 2 kilometers beneath the plateau, linking all 3 pyramids, chambers, conduits the team described as pipelines, what they interpreted as a water distribution system. Think about what that description actually is. Vertical shafts, spiral access ways, cubic foundation chambers, fluid channels. That is not the vocabulary of a cemetery. That is the vocabulary of a plant. Malanga himself pointed at the engineering logic, noting that a structure as incredibly heavy as the Khafre pyramid needs a solid, prepared foundation, or it sinks. The project's spokesperson, Nicole Ciccolo, said the discovery could redefine our understanding of the sacred topography of ancient Egypt, providing coordinates for previously unknown and unexplored subterranean structures. The team went further, suggesting the complex could even contain the fabled Hall of Records, the legendary lost archive of ancient knowledge said to be sealed beneath Giza. And they didn't stop at Khafre. In follow-up announcements, the same team claimed the 3rd pyramid, Menkaure, sits above its own set of hollow spiral pillars, insisting that all 3 pyramids are interconnected nodes on a single buried network. The idea of the pyramid as a machine wasn't new either. In 1998, the engineer Christopher Dunn published The Giza Power Plant, arguing from the tool marks and the pyramid's internal architecture that the structure was a functional device, and pointing to the Grand Gallery, the granite chambers, and the shafts as components rather than corridors. For decades, that theory lived on the fringe. Now, suddenly, there were radar images that looked like its blueprint. And then the wall came down. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities and the most powerful gatekeeper in Egyptology, rejected the findings outright, stating that the claims had no scientific basis, that no radar devices had been used inside the pyramid, and that these rumors would go to the dustbin of history. The ministry confirmed the team had never been granted permission to work at the site, which is itself revealing. The scans were made from satellites, from orbit, the one method that doesn't require permission. Lawrence Conyers, a ground-penetrating radar expert at the University of Denver, called the underground city idea a huge exaggeration and said radar cannot penetrate to those depths. The team's new results, unlike their 2022 paper, had not passed peer review. The Khafre project announced its hope to excavate and verify. But history shows what happens to excavation requests at Giza. They enter review and they stay there. The site remains under military and antiquities control. The shafts remain unverified, and no independent team has been allowed to test the claim on the ground. The plateau was scanned, the images went public, and then the door closed. So it's time to slow down and ask the honest question. Does any of this prove there's a lost machine complex under the pyramids? Probably not. Not yet. And you deserve to hear why. The SAR technique Malanga and Biondi used is genuinely unproven at these depths. Most radar specialists say the signal physics simply doesn't support imaging structures hundreds of meters down, and that what the team calls shafts could be processing artifacts, patterns created by the algorithm rather than by the ground. The findings weren't peer-reviewed. One of the researchers has a long history of publishing books about aliens, which doesn't disprove his data, but it does explain the skepticism. And the Serapeum boxes and the drill cores, remarkable as they are, sit within a civilization that demonstrably moved 1,000-ton obelisks and had centuries to perfect stoneworking. Extraordinary skill is not the same as impossible technology, but that doesn't make the discovery ordinary. Because here's what survives even the harshest skepticism. The Big Void is real, confirmed in nature by 3 independent physics teams, and still unexplored. The doors in the Queen's chamber shafts are real, photographed, and still closed. The Osiris Shaft is real, matching the ancient descriptions of a water-ringed chamber under the plateau. The Serapeum's precision is real, measured, and still debated by engineers. And Giza's bedrock is honeycombed limestone, karst geology known to contain natural caves and man-made shafts that have never been fully mapped. In 2008, explorers documented an extensive cave system beneath the plateau. Entered through a forgotten tomb cataloged as NC2, its passages running for hundreds of meters before the survey stopped, and it has never been comprehensively mapped since. The question is not whether something is down there. Something is. The question is what and how far down it goes. And that's what makes the 2025 scans so hard to walk away from. Because if even a fraction of what those images show is real, if there is even one artificial shaft in that bedrock, then the story of the pyramids inverts. The monuments we've spent 2 centuries studying would be the roof, not the building. It would mean the Old Kingdom, or something before it, undertook an underground engineering project on a scale we associate with the 20th century. It would explain the precision at Saqqara, the tool marks in the granite, the water chambers in the myths. It would mean the ancient texts about a world beneath Giza were never religion, they were documentation. And it would mean our history is missing a chapter, not a paragraph, a chapter. Buried on purpose under 4,500 years of sand and silence, which leaves one final question no one has answered. If it was just foundations, just quarries, just caves, why has every attempt to look closer for 200 years ended the same way? The images from that March press conference are still online. Anyone can look at them. 8 shafts, 2 cubes, half a mile down. The excavation requests are still pending. The Big Void is still sealed, its contents untouched since the age of Khufu. And tonight, on a windswept plateau outside Cairo, the second pyramid stands in the dark. 5 million tons of stone, resting on something no living person has ever seen. Still there, still sealed, still waiting. If you want to know what else is buried in humanity's file of forbidden discoveries, watch the next investigation on screen right now.